Iron Man 3 is directed by Shane Black, written by Shane Black and Drew Pearce, and stars Robert Downey Jr., Gwyneth Paltrow, Ben Kingsley, and Guy Pearce. Now, Iron Man 3 takes place after the events of the Avengers, and after the events of the Avengers, Tony Stark's pretty messed up. He essentially has PTSD, he can't sleep, and to kind of, remedy this in a way, he just keeps building suits. So he has like, 40 something suits at this point. He's putting a strain in his relationship with Pepper, and if just to make things worse, this terrorist called the Mandarin pops up, and the Mandarin pretty much takes everything away from Tony. And Tony finds himself isolated and alone without this technology, and he just kind of has to figure out who is this Mandarin guy and how does he tie in to Tony's past. Now, Iron Man 3 is a movie that I thought was much better the second time I watched it. First time you watch it, there's something happens, something happens in this movie that you might not be prepared for, and if you go into this movie with certain expectations and this something lets you down, you're probably not going to enjoy it as much as you might on like a second viewing, which is why I wanted to give it a chance. I watched it second time, I realized that hey, if you kind of ignore this something that happens, it's actually a pretty good movie. I kind of blame marketing for that, also because this movie is actually really funny. And when you watch the trailers and stuff, they try and make it look like the darkest thing ever. So going into it, I kept expecting, the dark moment, but it never really comes. It is pretty much lighthearted for the most part. Apparently, this was Robert Downey Jr.'s last film to be Tony Stark, but that's absolutely not gonna happen. Like, I don't think they're gonna let that happen. They're gonna extend this contract. He's gonna be in way more Marvel movies, so. And like I said, this is a pretty solid film, but, there are some pretty exasperating things that happen. I'm not talking about something, I'm talking about other things, but, these things happen and they really do bring down the movie for me. Anyway, first of all, I'm talking about Iron Man 3. First thing I really want to touch on are the visual effects, because again, this was nominated for an Oscar, and the visual effects here are mind-blowing. 2013 was like the year of gravity. It's always going to be known as that. But movies like Iron Man 3, they had spectacular special effects. The suits here look literally real this time. I mean, when you rewatch Iron Man 1 and 2, you can kind of tell sometimes that, oh, they're not, actually tangible or anything. But here, like, this metal has just so much detail. And there's tons of suit variety here also. I mean, because Tony Stark has been making so many suits, of course you're going to get lots of different designs, and you could tell these people are just having so much fun making all these designs. The Extremis visual effects, which is like the thing that turns people into kind of like rage monsters almost, uh, I kind of wish it were more unique, because it is just kind of like, they're burning under their skin, and it just kind of looks kind of typical. I don't know. I would have liked something that would have kind of reflected or the look of the suits, but for the most part, it's fine. Interesting thing with the cinematography, we get lots of little cool new angles here. Like, for the first time, we get first person view from inside the suit, and looking outwards, not just facing inwards. And touches like that just make it feel like the series has progressed. And overall, this actually looks like the darkest kind of movie, because the first two Iron Man films, they were very bright and vivid, the bright reds and golds. But here it's just a bit more dirty. I mean, stuff is still shiny. It's just that, the overall look is very dark. Like, most of the environments here are dark. And I kind of like this also because it does counteract sort of the funniness and the tone of the movie. This movie is also edited very well. It moves constantly from one set piece to the next, with very little slowdown in between, thanks to the plot always being there. Like, they never deviate from it, and the constant funniness, like, just the humor really keeps things alive. The action scenes also are very well edited. There's way more stuff happening this time, and some action scenes here are right up there with the final action scene in Iron Man 2, but for the most part, more stuff is happening, and it's edited very clearly. In terms of score, there's no more electric guitar for Iron Man, unfortunately, but the score is more anthemic, so I guess it kind of makes sense following the Avengers. It's a bit more heroic. I was missing AC/DC though. Like, I would have liked that to be a thing in the Iron Man movies, just to have AC/DC whenever Iron Man shows up. Now, in terms of plot, Iron Man 3 actually has quite an engaging plot. It's simple, but it's not like simple-minded necessarily. Like, it's very easy to follow without becoming convoluted. And like I said, it always chugs along. It's kind of like a mystery at a certain point, but things just really fall into place really nicely. However, like I mentioned at the beginning of this video, you kind of have to be prepared for a plot twist that happens. And this one, it's really left field. Something happens and it's seriously going to make or break the experience for you. But like I said, if you don't really mind that, or if you're not like a comic book purist or anything, there is a good plot here. And what I like is that the internal conflict never goes away. Like they always keep in mind that this is Tony Stark's story. It's not just an action movie. And it's great to see how Tony has been affected by the effects of the Avengers. Like I'm really excited to see how the other characters cope with it. But for one, Tony's response, the whole PTSD thing is really interesting. It's really exciting. It just adds more to his character. And for once in the Iron Man movies, we actually have interesting villains. I really do think they're interesting, at least. Guy Pearce plays Aldrich Killian, who, is doing this whole extremist thing, and Ben Kingsley plays the Mandarin. Both these guys are very different in terms of being villains, but I think they are really interesting because, again, they tie into each other. And ultimately, I think their motives kind of do make sense, and, it just, their whole plan makes sense. And what I love also is that the supporting characters are much more involved. Pepper gets lots more screen time here. Don Cheadle's Rhodey finally gets more action also. Heck, even Jarvis gets a bigger part, and he actually has like personality this time. It's great. And in terms of acting, what else is there to say? I mean, about Robert Downey Jr., he does it again. He is so great here. What I love is that the Iron Man movies keep giving him more to his character, so he's able to, inject more stuff into Tony Stark. And here he plays that whole PTSD thing really well. Like he's so much more fractured in this movie than he was in the past. And but again, like I keep saying, he always has that devil may care attitude. And I actually really do buy the chemistry this time between Pepper and Tony, but I think it's more because of Robert Downey Jr. than it is Gwyneth Paltrow. But anyway, it is very believable. It is kind of awe-inducing when he said that he cares for her and stuff like that. And again, the rest of the cast is great, but I really do have to single out Ben Kingsley as the Mandarin. He's interesting because there are kind of like two sides to this guy, and Ben Kingsley plays the Mandarin in both these sides like really really well. You really believe both sides, and he is extremely entertaining. I can't really say more about him. He's a big secret. In terms of direction, Shane Black, who directed Kiss Kiss Bang Bang with Robert Downey Jr. also, it's evident from that he really knows how to do comedy, and he really does because the comedy stays constant, and it never devolves into like a comedy. Really, it just really does stay on track while being funny. But surprisingly, he also directs the action scenes extremely well. Like they're just as good as the Iron Man 2 action scenes, I think. Especially like, let's just say House Party Protocol. That scene is amazing. But again, I like how Shane Black kind of takes notes from Jon Favreau, that he really makes sure that this is a story about Tony Stark, and he never loses that. As for my problems about the movie, there are only a couple, but they are pretty big. For one, this does not feel like a movie that came after the Avengers. I mean, aside from the PTSD stuff, when you have a movie that comes out after the Avengers, you expect it to be more of in this universe now, because this is no longer like the Iron Man world. It is the Avengers world, and this still feels like just an Iron Man movie. Like, where is Shield in all of this? Where is Captain America in all of this? Like, I would just want like an explanation, just like one line of dialogue to explain why this does not feel like an Avengers movie. But I don't get that, and that kind of disregard for uh, the whole universe really does take away, I think, from me, because it starts to feel very independent and almost self-indulgent. My bigger problem, though, and this is a really big problem in my opinion, is that something happens in the ending wherein they do something to Tony Stark that really kind of changes him permanently. And this thing is done like so easily and so quickly when it's supposed to be like this huge part of his character, and he suddenly just changes. And I really don't understand that, and I really don't like it also, because it's part of what makes Tony Stark such an interesting character, and they just completely did away with it in like 2 seconds, literally, and I don't understand why. So yes, I actually don't have a problem with the plot twist anymore. I do have a problem though with this, because I don't see how this will follow, and how come it never happened before. When I see something wrong with an ending, I really, really attack it, because again, like I said, I place lots of importance in endings, and here I just don't understand why they did it. But in the end, Iron Man 3 is still a pretty good movie. It's actually very solid. It does kind of ride the coattails of the Avengers quite well, because it still has that quality in it, better than like Iron Man 2, definitely. Give it another chance. If you didn't like the plot twist, just watch it again and you'll be surprised like I was. And it's interesting to keep in mind that this is a very different movie now from the first Iron Man. Like, in terms of like just tone, like how Tony Stark does things, it's very different, but it's still good. And I like how there's constant growth to this character, not doing the same thing over and over again. Alright, so that's my review of Iron Man 3. What do you guys think of it? Whether you agree with me or not, please leave me a comment and let's have a conversation.